So quickly, we'll get into the land use impact calculator information in a minute. There's a little bit of contextual information to give you first. If this is your first time interacting with SSG, you should know that we are a workers cooperative. We were founded back in 2003. We have over 35 member owners now. We're a democratically run and owned organization. And we have over 200, I think we have over 300 climate action projects at this point across Canada, the US, and into South America. So we've been at this for a long time. We've been helping various levels of government do their climate action planning across all governments and community sectors. And this is the work we're passionate about. So we're going to get into the tool today. We'll do a bit of an introduction. We'll do a live demo for you. And then we'll try to leave as much time as possible at the end for questions and answers, because that's where the fun conversation always is. Before we get going, I'd like to just acknowledge that, well, I just want to ground us a little bit in what brings us here today. So, which I think I can safely assume is a deep appreciation and concern for the well-being of our planet. And so a lot of us live in urban environments, and I think it's easy to forget that these urban environments, they're pretty recent. They're new, and they've been planned and realized by a handful of people over a very short period of time. At SSG, our work and our organization, we're kind of focused on reshaping our imagination and what we do so that when we consider decisions for how these landscapes, urban or otherwise, will be shaped or reshaped and used in the years to come, that we build them in healthy, resilient, and equitable ways. We're all living on lands that have been stewarded and shaped by other humans for generations, for time immemorial. And we believe that our work in leading a transition to a decarbonized future must also contribute to the healing and decolonizing journey that we should all share together. So, as such, we believe it's important to acknowledge in all we do the traditional stewards of the lands on which we work. So at SSG, we've worked with people based throughout what's currently referred to as the Americas, but are on the traditional lands of the Michipee in the north, all the way to the Weejichis in the south, and from the Ho'okaminam speaking peoples in the west to the Mi'kmaq in the east, and all of the other indigenous peoples in between. Some of these lands are unceded, and we recognize the historical and continued oppression on which our current occupation of these lands is based, and we work to overcome that. So, as promised, here's another quick Menti exercise for you, just to kind of get a sense of who's here. Be interested to know kind of what climate action planning and tracking tools or approaches you're currently using in your municipality or have used. Same approach, join at menti.com, put in your code, and just give us an idea, like amongst these tools that we have here, do you use any of these? So some of you, maybe your councils have declared a climate emergency declaration, maybe you set a target or you've adopted a scientific or international target. Maybe use a climate lens for decision-making, carbon budgets for tracking how much carbon you've used and how much you have left in your budget. Maybe you've used task force for climate disclosures, which is a rare one, but possibly some have used it. Or maybe there's some others that you've used. Or maybe your municipality doesn't use any, but that's why you're here and you're interested in using some tools. So it looks like at least a few of you have a climate emergency declaration, which is great. A few of you have climate targets and climate action plans, climate lens framework. I'd be interested to know more about that. And there's one carbon budget framework. Nice. Nice. We're trying to work with lots of municipalities on getting those tools set up for accountability. And just quickly, how familiar are you with the land use impact calculator tool that we're going to review today? So have you, have you seen it before? Are you pretty familiar with using it? Could you introduce it to a colleague if you had to? Have you just downloaded it but haven't really used it that much yet? Or is this kind of your first time? And if you can lead a webinar on how to use this tool, please be in touch. Maybe after today, you can lead the webinar on how to use the tool. I'm glad at least that some have downloaded it and checked it out. If you've done that, then you can kind of follow along as we go through the tool today. Okay, thanks for participating in the Menti. I'll give you a little bit of context of why we developed this tool. We worked with FCM and a little bit with CMHC as well to address a few different issues. So I think it's well acknowledged and documented now that there's an increasing urban population, so urbanization is happening. There's more and more people living in urban areas, and urban areas are growing as a result, and sometimes densifying, but often eating up adjacent lands. There's an affordable housing crisis. I don't know if you've heard, but it's pretty universal across the nation at this point. Housing prices are vastly outstripping household incomes. So there's a need for affordable homes. Also, something that we don't always think about, maybe as planners we do, but as developers and homeowners and like commuters, we don't. Infrastructure servicing is pretty expensive. So the more infrastructure we develop, the roads, the pipes, the more the municipalities are on the hook for operating, maintaining those pieces of infrastructure. And as such, urban areas tend to subsidize low density areas in terms of the taxes recouped from homes versus the costs of the infrastructure. It's not always the case that there's that quote unquote subsidy, but it is often the case. Just because those suburban and extra urban infrastructures they're costly to upkeep over time. So recognizing all of these challenges, we also acknowledge that low density neighborhoods have higher per capita emissions than compact complete communities. We've seen this at SSG time and time again in all of the modeling that we do for climate action planning. And we're highly aware that any new development we make, the infrastructure, the types of buildings we're using, that is locked in for decades. So whether we like it or not, we're using that infrastructure, we're using those energy sources, we're using those roads because that's what we built, and it's going to be there for decades, and it's expensive to retrofit in the future. So good decisions are needed now in terms of development. And also, we found that municipalities, when we're working with municipalities, there's kind of a lack of tools to properly assess proposed developments. And we haven't found a lot of comparison tools, so scenario tools like the land use impact calculator that we'll review with you. That can kind of say, well, if we develop this way versus that way, what does it mean in terms of the energy used by those buildings? And what does it mean in terms of the emissions produced? And what does it mean in terms of the costs, both development costs, capital costs, and maintenance costs? So we wanted to address that with new tools. And just quickly to kind of give you an idea of the scale of things we're talking about, There was a study done for Calgary. It's a while ago now, but there haven't been that many studies done in this vein. For the Calgary 2050 plan, they hired IBI consultants to determine what would be the differences between suburban development versus infill development. And they found that overall infill versus dispersed developments saves 33% on new built environment. And so we're usually talking tens of millions or more dollars here. 36% on street life cycles, so saving on the maintenance costs, and 55% on new water and wastewater infrastructure, and 14% on road, water, wastewater, fire, and parks services. They also found that you could double the transit service in the existing the infill developments for the same cost as extending it to the dispersed developments. So that's one example. Another example was in Prince George. This was done as part of the BC CLIC tool, which is another infrastructure tool that looks at infrastructure costs and operating capital and operating costs. So in Prince George, infill versus greenfield development saved 95% on infrastructure costs, just using the existing infrastructure and bolstering a little bit instead of developing brand new infrastructure. 14% on operating costs per household, 21% on infrastructure replacement, and 18% on external costs. However, it's an interesting point that they found in Prince George. It did have 12% lower tax revenues in this case. And so it's just to highlight that, the savings, the urban subsidizing the suburban areas statement does depend on your municipal tax setup. So just to be aware of that, things to look into as you're making development decisions and as you're using tools like the land use impact calculator. Finally, as part of a study that we did for Halton Hills region, there were 3 development scenarios that we assessed for greenfield, greenfield, kind of a mixture of greenfield and infill, and then infill developments. And we estimated the emission savings between those 3 scenarios, and it came out to 5,700 kilotons cumulative emission savings for the purely infill development versus the purely greenfield development, which is not insignificant. It's about 1.3 million homes worth of annual emissions. So these calculations can be done. You can use these calculations in your decision making for what kinds of developments you want or are considering in your municipality or in your area. Okay. Oh, I think, did we skip one? Thanks. So this is kind of the synopsis of the information that municipalities need. So new development considerations, we have to think about development patterns, the housing profile, so the types of homes that we're developing, the infrastructure, so the roads and the pipes, the energy, transportation, like the modes that we're using to get around, energy emissions, and the financial implications of it all. So it's a lot to consider, and you can go down many, many rabbit holes in figuring out all of these things. We've developed a land use impact calculator tool as kind of a high level assessment, so that it's a good starting place to compare different land use scenarios. And just to tell you a little bit about what's included in it, we have operated and embedded emissions, and then we have capital and operational costs and revenues. So the focus is on housing, so the operation, the embedded carbon emissions in building homes, and also in building the infrastructure, so the road, water, wastewater systems. And then we also consider the capital and operational costs and revenues from transportation and community services like police stations, hospitals, schools, and waste collection. So the operating and embedded emissions, just to give you a quick breakdown of these two elements, the emissions and the costs. For housings, we consider the materials in the homes, the energy used by the homes, the size of the homes, and what type of building they are. So if they're single detached, or if they're townhome or row home, or if it's a multi-unit building. We consider for the road, water, and wastewater infrastructure components, the materials they're made of, the length of those roads and pipes, the width of those roads, and the service length, the connections to the homes and the buildings. And then for transportation, we consider fuel use for emissions. For the capital and operational costs and revenues, we have these considerations. For housing. We include the development costs, the energy costs, the developer charges, the property taxes. So kind of the four basic capital and operational costs for housing. For road, water, and wastewater infrastructure, it's usually the dollar per area or dollar per linear meter, and also the user fees that you might collect. And then for community services, it's the cost per dwelling for things like your fire departments, your schools, your waste collection. So these are all the units, the considerations that are captured in the tool. And then we have three archetypes that we use for the neighborhoods. So we have an urban infill archetype, transit-oriented development, and a suburban archetype. And so these are three of the examples here. Olympic Village in Vancouver is where I live. Côte Sainte-Catherine in Montreal is a good transit-oriented development. So that's right next to a metro station there. And then Evergreen in Calgary is, I want to say a famous suburban development in Calgary. So we kind of based a lot of the assumptions in the tool off of these neighborhood archetypes. Okay, finally, for the context before we get into the demo here, why would you use this tool? So I think there's a lot that I've just explained of why you use it, but to kind of give you the preview of what you're about to see, it's Excel based, which seems not that interesting, maybe, but it's kind of important because it's familiar. You don't need to learn a new tool or a software or something. And hopefully you're kind of familiar with Excel outputs. There's data, there's charts, they're familiar, recognizable, and you've probably manipulated Excel data and graphs in other endeavors. So it was important for us to make this tool accessible for everyone. In terms of how to use it, there's an app interface that's just a plugin for the Excel tool. It's very step by step. You step through it, you follow the instructions, so it's simple to use, and you can customize it for inputs and assumptions. So it's best if you know about the developments that you're considering, and those numbers that I went over earlier. You can customize it so that it's very useful and particular to your development scenarios. I think I saw a chat message fly by there about being able to access it as a add-on. And it's true that some municipalities have a firewall for Microsoft Excel add-ons. The way that we've dealt with this in the past is just to ask your IT department to unfirewall the Excel add-in so that you can access it. You're not alone in your restrictions there. This has happened before. Okay, I think that's enough for the context. We want to get into the demo, and we want to talk to you a little bit about how you'll use it. So I'll turn it over to Noah. Noah, if you could just introduce yourself and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I'm Noah Purves-Smith, and I'm a senior modeler and application developer at SSG. And And so I helped develop this tool, and I'm located on the East Coast in Nova Scotia. And that's enough intro about me. Let's take a look at the tool. So hopefully everybody can see my screen. And okay, first of all, we're going to assume that people have had a chance to install it. But if not, you can visit the tool website, luic-ciut.ssg.coop, and I think we'll get that link put in the chat for you. So I'm not going to go over how to install it because all the information is on the website for that. But I will do a quick tour of the interface, and then we'll get into we'll do some demos of some different scenarios. So I should have it installed here, but I'm just going to go to the store. So this is one way to install it. Go to install, insert add-ons, and I just search SSG and it comes up. There's 2 add-ins by SSG, and this is the one I want. So when the tool first launches for the first time, it's going to give a bit of an intro, bunch of intro slides, giving some information, how to use the tool. And the other one thing I always suggest, because the Microsoft always has a default sort of size on the right hand for add-ins, but it is adjustable, and making it a little bit wider is going to make it easier to fill in. So a little bit about the interface here. So there's this dashboard area, which is, as we build some scenarios, they're going to start showing up in here. There's a menu here. So I can again launch the tutorial if I want, those slides we just looked at. There's a help screen, which basically you can fill in a form if you find a bug or have a question. You can message us through there. Some about information, and finally the tool is also, you can run it in English or French. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard, and let's start with building some scenarios. So first of all, I'm going to, when I launch a new scenario, it brings up this wizard interface. So we're going to give a bit of background information about the scenario. Then we're going to jump in and talk, enter some inputs for our buildings, the services we want, like police and fire, infrastructure, then transportation, and finally municipal revenue. So starting off with the information, I'm going to call this one low density baseline. And this one is going to be all single detached homes, no transit, no active transportation, and baseline building code. So I'm just entering a bit of information there for reference of what this scenario is about. And I'm going to do these today in Ontario. By selecting the province, that's helping the tool know things like what grid emission factors and so on need to be used. So I'm going to I entered the year, and then there are a number of different archetypes that Jeremy outlined. So I'm going to start with this low residential. And you can see when I choose one, it gives me a little preview of what this neighborhood's likely about. So I'm going to go back to the low density and go next. So now taking a look at our buildings, it defaulted to 700, but we can change that. So for the scenarios I'm going to build up, let's assume 300 dwellings. And the building energy code here for this first scenario is going to just be baseline energy code. And there's some references here. If I can click on this link and get more information about where this baseline, the numbers are coming from. And I need to tell it what energy sources are going to be used for stationary for buildings. So we're going to be using a mixture of natural gas and electricity. And we're going to say it's you know, it's 80% natural gas and 20% electricity. Sort of some kind of national averages for places that are serviced by natural gas. And then services. So on each of these, or on many of these screens, there are defaults already provided, and you can go with those or you can change them. In this case, I'm just gonna accept the defaults for the services section here. But there's things like the costs per student for schools and for police and fire and waste and recycling. And here we're assuming we're not building a new waste facility, but we're increasing, there's a cost of adding those new dwellings to the capacity of an existing facility. Okay, so next up we've got infrastructure. And I'm going to say we're going to build 2 kilometers of 2-lane road. And we're going to build 1 kilometer of 4-lane road. Sidewalks in the assumptions, sidewalks are included in the roads, but that all comes down to how you're in entering your cost intensities. So for your municipality, you may have different numbers. You may choose that some roads have sidewalks and some don't. For any of these sections, when you see a little info circle here, you can click it and bring up more information about where the default numbers are coming from, etc. And so I'm gonna bike lanes. What do we say? We're not gonna do any bike lanes in this neighborhood. And then wastewater pipe or water pipe. We had 3 kilometers of new roads, so we should probably have the same amount of pipe. And same for wastewater. And that'll be it for infrastructure. Now I'm on to transportation. So how much are people traveling in personal use vehicles? I'm gonna just use the defaults here. 20,900 vehicle kilometers traveled per dwelling per year. And we're gonna say those are mostly gas cars, and there's some electric cars. So let's say 95% gas and 5% electric. And maybe we won't have any transit in this community. And I think in this scenario, we said we're not going to do any active transportation either. So everybody's driving their cars to this low density neighborhood. And finally, we need to enter the revenue side of things. So let's say we're going to have $1,500 per dwelling of development fees, and let's say $3,000 a year per dwelling in taxes. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. And so right away we can see it's generated 3 worksheets for me. So there's this low density baseline, and this is all of the inputs that we put in, plus everything that the tool's gone and calculated for us. So here again, we've got all the inputs, and then the outputs. How much energy does that equate to using for these 300 houses with that building code? How much energy is being used, and what are the emissions associated with that? And then we've got our services and the capital and maintenance costs. And we've got infrastructure, again, all the inputs we put in, and then what's calculated out as the actual capital and maintenance costs of those, and our transportation, and finally our revenue. And along with it, it's also giving us all of the input, all of the assumptions and references that went into the calculation. So you can, all the references are available there with links to go and see where they came from. So that's the scenario details worksheet. There's a scenario summary sheet, which just has the basic a summary of the numbers. And right now there's just one scenario, but we'll see as we build more scenarios, we'll see more, more popping up beside here to compare. And we've got charts, but there's only one scenario to chart right now. So next, I want to give an example is let's take this same low density neighborhood. I'm going to just duplicate it. I'm going to call it low density with passive homes. And we're going to change the baseline building code to passive house building code and see how that changes our scenario. So we're going to keep everything else the same. So next, I'm going to here on the buildings, I'm going to change that to, and you can see in here, there's a whole bunch of available building codes in here to choose from. So from BC step code, different steps to NECB tier 2, 3, 4, passive house, and Toronto Green Standard tier 1, 2, 3, and 4. But so here we're going to choose passive house. And let's clean up the energy sources here too. So we've got natural gas and electricity. I'm gonna get rid of the natural gas, and we're gonna say it's 100% electricity. And then other than that, I'm gonna keep the rest of the settings in here the same. So same number of homes, same services, same infrastructure, same transportation, same municipal revenue, and I'll click and save that. So now, so I have the first scenario we did, I've got this next one, low density with passive. In the summary, we can see now I've got 2 columns. And in the charts, now we've got some to compare. So we can see right off the bat that the energy use has gone way down with the passive homes. And the energy use per dwelling, obviously the same too. But our costs are staying the same because we're still doing the same amount of servicing, and we're, same amount of roads and everything else. And we'll be able to look at some more of those charts in a bit more detail, but let's make it more interesting by adding some other neighborhood types in here first. So let's start a new scenario again. And this time I'm going to do transit. I'll just put a transit or TOD for transit oriented design with diesel rapid bus, let's say. So we're going to try and do a little more dense, and we're going to provide some transit. And let's keep it at passive house. So all passive house row houses, half of transportation done by diesel powered buses. And so let's keep things the same. We'll build it in Ontario again, and we'll say 2030 again. And I'm going to go to transit oriented design. So this default was 750 single detached and some row and apartment. What I'm actually going to do is, this is a little bug we got to fix in the tool. I can't put a 0 in here, so I'm going to put 1. For there's going to be one lonely single detached house in the neighborhood. And it's going to be all grid electricity. And we're going to do 300 row houses. These are going to be passive. Also grid electricity. And I'll just put it down to 1 apartment also. Passive house, grid electricity, 100%. Okay, and then services, like previously, I'm going to keep the same services and the same defaults for those. Infrastructure. Let's change things up a little bit. We're only going to build some 4-lane roads here. So we're going to do 0 2 lanes. We're going to do 2 kilometers of 4-lane. And we'll do also 2 kilometers of bike lane and 2 kilometers of water pipe and 2 kilometers of wastewater pipe. And here I'm going to take this default of 14,000 VKTs per dwelling, and we'll give it the same mix of gas and electric vehicles. But now we're going to add into some transit. Now, an important thing to consider with the transit, and I think some of our default numbers might be a bit high, is we have to be considering the act, like we have to consider into our numbers here the share of of a single bus being driven. So how many how many VKTs of a bus with 100 people on it? You only have 1/100th of that share for that dwelling, for example. So I'm gonna change this from 4,000. I'm gonna put 100 VKTs per dwelling, and we're gonna make this diesel buses, and we'll put in some active transport to 1,000 VKTs per dwelling of walking and 1,000 of biking. And finally, the development charges, we'll do them the same as the previous scenarios. So 1,500 per unit in development fees and 3,000 per unit in taxes. And I mean, I think there's lots we could discuss around how some of these numbers might are going to vary between municipalities, and the comment Jeremy was saying about urban often subsidizing suburban development. But here, if we look at, so I've done that new third scenario now, and we can start to see, so our energy use is gone down. Our energy use per dwelling has gone down. Our emissions have gone down. Our capital costs are staying the same because we've got the same number of units. So our service capital costs, so police and fire and so on. But the infrastructure is going down because we're building fewer roads and fewer pipes. And we can see our differences in the travel as well. Okay, so now let's take another step further, is let's do a transit-oriented design. I'm going to take this same community, but let's switch it to electric buses. And next, so I'm going to keep the same buildings, same services, same infrastructure. We'll use the same personal use vehicles, but for the transit, I'm going to change it from diesel fuel. I'm going to take that away, and I'm going to put the grid electricity for the buses. And we'll keep the same charges and property taxes again. So if I save that, now I've got 4 different scenarios in here on the scenario summary, and in the charts. We can again see some small differences. So the buses are using the same amount of energy to get from A to B, but their emissions are slightly lower because they're electric buses. And then finally, I'd like to do a couple of scenarios with with total urban infills. So let's go more dense. So this one we're going to do, let's say 300 passive house apartments, mix of active transport, renewable bus transport. And we're going to do only building adjacent laneway roads. So we're not building any big new roads. So let's take a look at, let's imagine that and try and build something like that. So I'm going to go again, Ontario 2030 and urban infill. So again, I'm going to okay, so we'll do a mix of row and apartments. So we'll do 20 row, let's say. And we'll do these passive again. And to keep so we can compare it to the other neighborhoods, we'll keep it at at 300 total dwellings. And go to electricity again. I'm going to again use the defaults for services. Now road. Let's say we're only going to build 200 meters of road. Oops. I put the M in, but it doesn't want the M. And 0 4-lane road. Sidewalk's going to be included with the new road. Bike lane. We could keep, we're going to add a bunch of new bike lane. Keep that at 2,000. And we'll keep our new pipes at, well, I guess maybe those should be 200 meters to go with our new laneway roads. And if I go to transportation, let's keep these defaults for personal use vehicles. So we got a mix of gas and EVs again. I've been putting 95 and 5, but hopefully by 2030 we'll have a higher percentage of EVs than that. Transit. Okay, we'll put 60 VKTs per dwelling of transit. And then we're gonna, that's gonna need to know, these are gonna be electric buses. And then we're gonna bump up the active transport some further. So 1,500 walking, 1,500 biking. And finally, to our development charges, we'll keep the same as the other scenarios. So let's take a look at what that's doing. So here we can see our energy use continues to go down. Our emissions continue to go down. Our services are staying the same because the same number of units. But our infrastructure capital just did a nosedive, which is great news. And meanwhile, our revenues are staying the same. And finally, what if we, just to give maybe a more realistic example too for the urban infill, is we could take that same amount of land, but really bump up the density. So I'm going to duplicate this urban infill, but I'm going to call it urban infill higher density. And in this case, we're going to double the units. So here, instead of 20, I'm going to do 40. And for the apartments, instead of 280, I'll do 560. So we're going to do a total of 600 units. And I'm going to keep everything else the same. And so finally, for our last scenario, if I look at the charts here, so we can see our energy use has gone back up, but that's because we got twice as many units, and it's still considerably lower than the low density, even with twice as many dwellings. Our energy use per dwelling is still just as low as the other urban infill. Our emissions, again, slightly more, but there are many more units there. Our capital service costs have gone up because we're servicing more people, but our infrastructure has stayed the same. And if we look at the revenue side, we've got a lot more development fees and revenue municipal taxes coming in for that same area of land. There's a quick demo of some of the types of scenarios that you can work up fairly quickly to get a kind of high level strategic view of what some different land use developments can look like. And with that, I think we are ready to jump into some Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. So yeah, it's a bit of a blitz through the tool there, but hopefully it gives you an idea of kind of what it's capable of and some of the considerations that can go into it as you step through it. We've been answering questions as we can in the chat here, but feel free to ask any questions out loud if you like. We can discuss. Chris.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, Noah. I was just wondering if you guys have any input with the municipalities who are using this tool on like how they're using it. Like, is it staff are applying this to all development applications that are coming in, applying it more as like a general neighborhood planning tool? Can you just maybe provide some insight into maybe some local governments who are already using this and how they might be?
Yeah, I think so. We've worked a little bit with a few municipalities on kind of making sure the tool is customized or like has the right settings for their context. I would say they're kind of using it mostly in an unofficial capacity, I suppose. So, to my knowledge, they're kind of not applying it wholesale to like every development application that comes across the desk. It's more for certain developments, like where they're interested in seeing what the costs and what the emissions are primarily, the maintenance costs. So it's mostly out of interest, I would say, as opposed to obligation in terms of using the tool. But the ones that we've worked with are finding it kind of useful as like a simple demonstration of the different scenarios that might be considered, and also as like a counterpoint to a proposed suburban or extra urban development. So to my knowledge, at least, that's how it's being used.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Megan, I waited till you had your headphones back.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering, so here at Grey County, we're in the process of exploring implementation of green development standards in collaboration with a couple other counties. And so I was just wondering how this tool might, and maybe builds on Chris's question a little bit, but how it might support implementation of, especially if we're looking at kind of like a flexible phased in approach.
Yeah, that's exactly a way that you can use this tool for sure. So we've developed several green development standards with municipalities in Canada and the US now. And yeah, you can either use, if you're considering adopting the green development standards of like Toronto, say, or somebody else that you're kind of familiar with, or if it's passive house standards or whatever, you can select those as scenarios. So you kind of, keep everything else the same as Noah was doing when you duplicated the scenarios and change the building code. And so you can customize it so that, you have different green development standards as your building code. And then you can see, if we are very ambitious with our green development standards versus if we're just like outpacing the national building code by a little bit, like what the effect is in terms of energy and emissions. So that's a really good way to use the tool, is to just do a desktop research on the different green development standards that you might use. Perfect application.
And if we were, how hard would it be to, like, if we create our own green development standards, to like build that into the tool once those metrics are approved by council?
Yeah, I guess that's probably a question for Noah as the coder of the tool, but we have customized the tool before. And so Noah, what do you think? It's not like a ton of work, really.
No, I think absolutely. If you had some green standards that you'd like to see in the tool, you could let us know, and we just need to, we'd need some stats and numbers on them to basically adjust the energy use intensity numbers associated with them, and we could put them in the tool, no problem.
Cool, thanks.
Megan, what county did you say you were with?
I'm in Grey County, and we're currently have a project in collaboration with Dufferin and Wellington counties to the south.
Okay, thanks. Nice. Anyone else have any other questions about the tool or its application, how it could be used, or how you might think it could be used? Any suggestions?
So maybe jump in again, Jeremy. I'll say that we're in Kelowna here. We're kind of actively looking to better assess development applications with a climate lens. And I think just, we automatically go to emissions, but I think there's other things that we want to assess for development applications, whether that be, the different hazards that we're dealing with, extreme heat, flooding, wildfires, tree canopy coverage, those types of things. So, I'd be really interested to see how this tool could be expanded and maybe that climate criteria, for lack of a better term, expanded beyond the emissions side of things. So I don't know, I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but I'll reframe it as a question. Has there been any thought to add different climate considerations to the model?
So I think, well, I guess for full disclosure for everyone else on the webinar here, SSG has worked with Kelowna on their resilience plan. But what comes to mind when we think about adding like adaptation elements to a tool like this is like the specificity of the geographical context in terms of hazards and vulnerabilities. Which is a hard thing to build into a tool like this. Like it would have to be like fairly regionally specific, and the hazards would have to be chosen, I suppose. But it seems to me the most challenging part of it would be the mapping. There's kind of like a mapping component that is required to be precise with it. So I suppose, just kind of thinking off the top of my head here, I suppose you could like have these kind of regional settings for different different geographical zones in Canada, I suppose, and you could like program those into the tool. And just like you choose a province, you could choose like a sub-region, say, and it would have those kind of default settings in it for risks and vulnerabilities and hazards. But I think it'd be a bit of work to do that. But I don't know, maybe it's not impossible. We could consider it.
No, thank you. I appreciate them. As we know, working together, that the adaptation side can be a little more complicated, but I think it's like most local governments are looking into that more and more, and would be interested to kind of assess new developments from that perspective as well. But like you said, appreciate that there's some regionally specific context that might be challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, Natalie, thanks for your comment about well, do you call it PIVC like I do, or is it PIEVC or PIVEC? Yeah, that's maybe one way to do it, is like to take an existing like engineering hazard and risk framework like that and apply it to the tool. It's possible. Yeah, good idea.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. And we'll be following up with the recording of this presentation and any other resources that we think might be helpful.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Great to see you all. Hope to see you again soon. Stay in touch with us. And I hope that you find these tools useful.